When I made the first one build for all game modes for my Deadeye, I had no idea that it would become a fully fleshed out series. And now here we are at the final video of the final elite spec for Heart of Thorns and Path of Fire, the Scourge. Very briefly, the idea is for the build to have one gear set to obtain and maintain one general playstyle all throughout the game modes of Guild Wars 2, because you might feel you're ready for endgame content but don't have the time to grind out multiple sets of gear, or you want to try out a different game mode but don't have the right gear for it, or don't understand the nuances of balance which can drastically change between the game modes. Or maybe you simply want to relax and play one build without having to fiddle with build templates to optimize for every single situation. Scourge does not have access to a second life bar. Instead, they use their life force for shade skills, which give barrier. While barrier is much more accessible than shroud because you can continue using other skills at the same time, it is much less safe because barrier must be timed accordingly, and it doesn't give as much damage reduction like the core shroud does. All Scourge shade abilities will have different effects that occur around your character, as well as give Torment on activation, and you can place down sand shades, which will increase the range of your shade abilities. You can have up to 3 shades out at any time, and you will gain boon duration and condition duration for each shade out, as well as damage reduction. The F2, Nefarious Fervor, will convert conditions into boons at your location and all shade locations, as well as give Torment because it's a shade ability. The F3, Sand Cascade, will give barrier to all shade locations and yourself, as well as Torment. And Garish Pillar will fear at these locations. Desert Shroud will give the barrier only to yourself, but will pulse Torment at the location of the shades for a lot of damage. Shades do not give out multiple hits of the support or damaging effect for being in multiple shades, so you shouldn't stack them, but rather cover more area so that you can damage or support multiple characters in different locations simultaneously. Also, shade abilities have a bit of a delay, so you can precast them into your manifest shade to land your supportive or damaging effects on hard to hit moving targets. The equipment I take is mostly Viper's gear for the condition damage and duration, but precision is also a great stat for condition Necromancer builds. I take Trailblazers on my back piece, Amulet, and rings because I want a little bit more vitality and toughness to not feel squishy. But the build has plenty of sustain, barrier, and range damage to allow you to play safely while still doing great damage. I use Rune of the Traveler for the movement speed increase, but it'll also give out some condition duration and all stats. Because this build does not have access to swiftness reliably or without wasting abilities you'd really want to save, having the movement speed passively will allow you more flexibility in your build, and just moving faster will improve your play experience. I take a Viper's Scepter and Dagger with Torment and Earth Sigil. These give Torment and Bleed on crit, which is why we want the Viper's stat set to give as much precision as possible, except a few pieces of Trailblazer for defense. Torch is a viable offhand, but has a bit less flexibility and utility than the Dagger. I take a Trailblazer Staff because I use that as my defensive weapon with energy and cleansing sigil, and you can replace cleansing with generosity if you prefer that, but the amount of pressure that can give might not be worth. In PvE, I take Soul Reaping, Curses, Scourge. In Soul Reaping, you get increased life force gain from all life force sources, and your shade skills will have a lower cooldown. You want to take Unyielding Blast to grant 2 stacks of vulnerability on shade skills, and since there are many shade skills, it's easy to get plenty of damage modifiers. Soul Barbs will grant 10% damage increase to power and conditions on leaving and entering Shroud. Since Desert Shroud counts as entering Shroud and the cooldown is about 17 seconds, you can have almost permanent uptime on Soul Barbs, since you'll leave Shroud 6 seconds into the cooldown and Soul Barbs last 10 seconds, so it'll last until 1 second is left on the cooldown. Doomfire will grant burning on shade skills with a 1 second internal cooldown. For this reason, you should avoid using all shade skills within the same time frame to avoid stacking them inside that internal cooldown. In curses, you gain plenty of precision synergy. Critting has a 33% chance to bleed, and bleed durations are increased. You also gain additional precision, and when entering Shroud, gain Fury, which increases your crit chance by 20%. You also gain 2% crit chance against targets per condition on them, and gain condition damage for a percent of your precision. All these precision synergies and curses makes it high value for a hybrid playstyle, but mostly this is a condition build. Master of Corruption will reduce the cooldown of corruption utilities and will inflict conditions on you. These conditions can be used to your advantage because you can transfer them to enemies using the Dagger Offhand Deathly Swarm, or Plague Sending, which will make your next hit after using Desert Shroud transfer conditions. You can use Blood is Power and then transfer the conditions you gain to the enemy right after for even more damage, or if you want to make sure that you don't accidentally transfer the wrong conditions, because in real situations you will get more conditions on you than the ones that you give to yourself, you can cast the Blood is Power and then mid-cast use Desert Shroud. As soon as Blood is Power hits, it will transfer the conditions before they even appear on you. Then I take Parasitic Contagion, which will heal you for 10% of all condition damage dealt. This trait would normally not heal you while you're in Shroud, but since Scourges do not technically enter Shroud, they can keep protecting themselves with Barrier while gaining all of the benefit of healing off their damage. This means that the more damage you deal, the more you heal. So if you're under a lot of pressure and can't fight back, it will become very oppressive. But since most of your survivability is through instant cast skills, and you can position while still hitting the target because of range damage, you can secure your health sustain even in high pressure situations. If the healing isn't needed, just go for Lingering Curse for more damage. In Scourge, take Nourishing Ashes, which grants 5% of your life force when burning an enemy or removing a boon on a 3-second internal cooldown. This will feed you much of your life force when using shade skills, because it will refund back some of the life force used because you're giving out burns whenever you use a shade skill. Sadistic Searing reduces the cooldown on punishment skills, which when used will buff your next manifest Sandshade with extra burning. This trait isn't amazing, but it does reduce the cooldown of your stun break, and the other options are more or less equivalent in value depending on the situation. Finally, Demonic Lore will increase all torment damage by 25% and inflict burning when inflicting torment on a 3-second internal cooldown per target. This just gives you a lot more damage, and damage is going to also give you healing because of Parasitic Contagion. I take the Blood Fiend heal because it is a ranged heal option that doesn't require me to cast it, so I can focus on dealing damage, which will result in more healing due to Parasitic Contagion anyways. Trail of Anguish is a low cooldown stun break that gives stability to allies and leaves a trail that burns and corrupts boons into Torment and Cripple. Blood is Power gives you might and a really long bleeding to the target, and then you get bleeding and torment, which you can then transfer back to the target. This is your highest damaging ability, so prioritize using it if you have condition transfer ready. Corrosive Poison Cloud pulses short duration poison, which doesn't do the most damage, but it also gives a projectile blocking field, which will also weaken enemies. While this build has plenty of sustain, it can still get overwhelmed in situations where there are a ton of enemies. Corrosive Poison Cloud helps to cull away a lot of the pressure that ranged enemies give with blocking projectiles, as well as weakness, which makes enemies have a chance to hit a glancing blow, which deals less damage. You could also replace Corrosive Poison Cloud for Epidemic, but this is more useful in group content where your allies will put on tons more conditions for you to spread out. It won't have as much of an effect when alone. You can choose between Ghastly Breach or Plague Lands, which are essentially the same thing, pulsing damage in an area you place it. Plague Lands does more damage but takes longer to fully realize its value, which may be too late in many situations. Ghastly Breach does less but acts faster and corrupts boon and gives you might. In open world, I like Ghastly Breach because it has a faster effect. In long-winded boss fights, I prefer Plague Lands. The Staff Auto Attack has a piercing projectile that will give out good life force generation. All the other skills are marks, which are long-range ground targeted abilities which will trigger when an enemy walks over them. The 2 skill will give out bleeding and regeneration to allies that are in the area when it is triggered. The 3 skill will give out chill and poison to enemies. The 4 skill will give a decent amount of power damage and a blast finisher, and it will also transfer 3 conditions to the enemy. You can use the 3 into 4 and that will give weakness because that's blasting a poison field. And the 5 skill is just a fear. Generally you want to stay in Scepter, but if you need more condition cleanse or an extra dodge from the sigils or to kite, the marks are very versatile and don't require you to face the target to use. On Scepter, the auto attack deals decent bleeding and poison, but requires you to face the target. Grasping Dead gives a long bleeding and cripple duration in an area and does not require you to be facing the target to use it. Feast of Corruption requires you to face your target and will grant life force, and Torment for each condition on the target up to 5. Deathly Swarm bounces between targets and transfers your conditions to them, but it is a projectile, so that can be reflected, so be careful with that. Enfeebling Blood is a long duration bleed and weakness that also corrupts a boon into a condition and can be used without facing the target. Because the build gets a lot of survivability from positioning, you want to know when you need to face a target to attack them and when you don't need to, and swap between these when you can to get the most positioning and mobility as you can. Essentially, only Scepter 1, 3, and Dagger 4 require you to face the target, as well as your Blood is Power, and everything else you should get used to casting while moving to get the maximum mobility while also dealing damage. Your Shade abilities give burning on a 1 second internal cooldown, and Shade skills give Torment, which with demonic lore gives burning every 3 seconds, and when gaining burning, you gain life force on a 3 second internal cooldown. So most of the cooldowns here are on 3 seconds, so you want to make sure that you use a Shade skill, whether it's the Manifest or any of the other skills, on around like a 3 second timer. And if you're low on life force or don't have any shades out, prefer to use the Manifest because that will give you not only free life force, but it also will increase your stats by giving you damage reduction and boon duration and condition duration. If you have plenty of life force and are low on Manifest Sand Shades, then use one of the other abilities. Try to keep using one shade skill every 3 seconds if you're low on life force, but if you need to use shade skills faster to support allies or you have a lot of life force available, you can use them faster to burst more Doomfire or vulnerability, and that'll give you a lot more damage. Your Torment Sigil will also trigger demonic lore to give burning whenever you crit, which will also give Nourishing Ashes life force, so you have a constant stream of life force even if you're low on shades for whatever reason. The skill priority is to always use Blood is Power whenever you have a condition transfer from Deathly Swarm or Desert Shroud. Then you want to use Scepter 3 because that's going to give you a lot of life force and damage. And then from there you can use Corrosive Poison Cloud, you can use Scepter 2, you can use Dagger 5, and in between you want to be using Sand Shade just to get a little bit of extra burning and to buff up your damage. Now the shade skills have no cast times to them, so they're not really competing with cast times, so you want to be using those as you're going, but they're not really on the priority system. They're kind of like on their own track by themselves. But yeah, you want to keep getting out like every 3 seconds you can use out a Sand Shade ability. So The elite skill, you can just throw that in whenever, but I'm not going to be using that here. So we're going to go in Sandshade, use Blood is Power with the Desert Shroud, the Scepter 3. I'm going to do my Blood is Power a second time and use the transfer, then my Scepter skills and Corrosive Poison Cloud. I'm going to do more Sandshade in between. I'm going to remove that weakness and get Might from that because the Nefarious Fervor actually transfers into a boon. Then I'm going to use my Blood is Power with the Desert Shroud here, Scepter 3. I'm going to put out another Sandshade. I want to be moving these out a little bit, but if I hit the same target, it will give Doomfire, so that's kind of nice. And going to use Corrosive Poison Cloud here, and Scepter 3, Nefarious Fervor to get the Might, and then I'm going to use my Blood is Power with the Desert Shroud here. I'm going to put out another Sandshade and give myself a little bit of barrier, Scepter 3, and I can use the Trail of Anguish here, which would make a little bit more burning on my next Manifest Sandshade. And Corrosive Poison Cloud is up here, so I'm going to convert the weakness into Might. Then I'm going to give my Blood is Power here. I'm running high on the Sandshades here, so I'm going to use them. Scepter 3 is up. And now I'm just going to Sandshade while I'm waiting for the cooldown of Scepter 3. Corrosive Poison Cloud is going to be up soon. I'm going to use a Sand ability there while I wait for that. And I'm going to remove this. Then I'm going to use the Blood is Power here with the Desert Shroud, Scepter 3, Dagger 5, and the Manifest Sandshade, just in between when you've got nothing going for you, and Scepter 2. Now you do want to make sure you don't cancel your auto attack if possible, but it's not the end of the world. Here's the Lord Hanif Champion Bounty. Even though this isn't a legendary, I consider this one of the harder bounties to do because he summons a bunch of undead and they pressure you, and then there's just plenty of conditions that you'll be gaining throughout the fight, and most builds don't have enough condition cleanse to deal with that. So this is a very good example of showing how my build not only can cleanse those conditions, but just survive all of these enemies constantly spawning and pressuring me. So the Corrosive Poison Cloud, you'll see I just put down, is really strong here because the healing that you gain from Parasitic Contagion isn't just from single target damage, it's also from AoE. So when I use Poison Cloud, that's doing all the poison damage to every single thing that it hits, and that's giving a lot of healing over time. So whereas Blood is Power is really good sustain because it does a lot of single target damage, Corrosive Poison Cloud is a lot of sustain in AoE situations. And you'll see my Blood Fiend keeps dying because there's so much random AoE and stuff just killing it. But it doesn't really matter that much as long as I keep putting out pressure, putting out my shades to gain more boons and buffs, and just keeping the damage flowing. I'll be healing off of Parasitic Contagion. And there will be situations here where I take a lot of damage and I just heal it up by just positioning correctly while also dealing damage. So here, you'll see that I am struggling a little bit to actually use Blood is Power as well because I have so many conditions on me that I can't transfer the condition off of me because it transfers the wrong one. But with the Dagger 4 there, you could see that it bounced and it transferred conditions for each bounce, so it actually got all of my conditions off. So the Dagger 4 is really effective in those situations where you don't have control over the amount of conditions you have on you. And normally, yes, you would want to ideally use your Desert Shroud to get your Blood is Power to transfer, but it's not that clean in every situation. So the Dagger 4 is very essential, in my opinion, for these less controllable situations. So now we've got the boss to around 50%. You can see that the mobs are just non-stop spawning, but because this is a bounty, you can't just sit around killing mobs the whole time, especially if they just keep respawning. So what's really nice is that I'm able to deal damage and clear those mobs out while maintaining a major focus on the actual bounty target. So the incidental or collateral damage that this build does is just really efficient. And you can see there I missed the Dagger 4 because it got blocked by the whatever the instability is of this champion. so I didn't transfer the conditions there, and that's kind of detrimental to my sustain, because not only do I not heal because I don't do more damage to transferring, but I've also got more conditions on me that's pressuring me. So you do want to be careful about the Dagger 4 there if it misses. If you really need to though, and the situation calls for it, you would just swap to the staff, and you have the cleansing sigil there, which would remove 3 conditions, and then you would have the staff 4, which would transfer another 3. So that'd be like a 6 Condi cleanse if you really needed it. But obviously Scepter is going to give you a lot more damage over time, which is going to give you more healing as well. So prefer to stick to that. And getting the boss pretty low, and you can see that the pressure is non-stop on me, but I'm just healing through it all. And I am making sure to use positioning as well. Put down my elite skill here. I could probably be using Plague Lands in this situation, but it doesn't really make that big of a difference. And yeah, just using all my corrupts here. I have a lot of conditions on me. I have to stun break there as well. So I get taunted very frequently on this encounter, and the Trail of Anguish is going to give me the stun break and stability that I need. And it's just going to give me more damage too, right? Because I'm just throwing down that AoE on the ground and it's hitting all these enemies. So yeah, in these AoE situations, Scourge is just so powerful at shrugging off damage and surviving and resustaining. So yeah, that is going to be the Lord Hanif bounty. In World vs. World, there are 2 options. You can use the Zerging build or the Roaming build. I'll go over the Zerging build here, and then later when I go over the PvP build, it's essentially the same thing for Roaming, so just port that over. For Zerging, staff is much more necessary to the gameplay because the range that it gives is the best for pressuring enemy groups safely. Because of this, you want the Soul Marks trait, which is going to allow you to hit enemies that have a lot of Aegis on them, which they're going to have in Zergs, and that's because you get unblockable marks, and you'll get extra life force. You'll need this life force to keep using shade skills off cooldown for the support, which is very useful to your team. You can go for Vital Persistence if you need more heals, or you can go for Soul Barbs, which is going to give you extra damage during your big bombs. Doomfire is massively nerfed in World vs. World for Scourges, so I take Eternal Life, which will help you maintain a minimum amount of life force so you never are in a situation where you can't use your shade skills if they're up. Take Path of Corruption instead of Master of Corruption to give Nefarious Fervor, the F2, a boon corrupt. Boons are very bloated in World vs. World, making boon corruption almost always effective. Then take Lingering Curse, which will improve your condition damage and turn Feast of Corruption into Devouring Darkness, which essentially makes it an AoE skill, which is great for hitting enemy groups with multiple boon corrupts. Because of the Torment Sigil and Earth Sigil, if your Devouring Darkness crits, it gives out 2 Torment and Bleeding to the target, which counts for the Devouring Darkness, so it will give out 5 Torment in an AoE with 1 animation. You can also just put on conditions beforehand and get a reliable AoE Torment. In Scourge, take the Abrasive Grit trait to make all of the barriers you give out cleanse conditions, which is great for survivability for you and your team. And it makes your Sand Flare, your heal skill, also give barrier to nearby allies. Trail of Anguish is a much longer cooldown in World vs. World, but is still such a necessary utility as it gives boon corruption if used on top of the enemy, and it is a stun break that also gives your allies stability. Sand Swell is a great utility for engaging on enemies, throwing down your Ghastly Breach, and then popping back out, or simply use it to fix poor positioning, since that is one of the most important factors for survival in World vs. World. Also take Spectral Walk as a secondary stun break and cleanse. If you're in a squad that has good support, then you really don't need the extra stun break and you can go for Well of Corruption. The playstyle is to poke and gain life force with staff marks. When you see a good choke point opportunity, put down your shades and literally mash all of your shade buttons to give torment and burning damage, fear, corrupts, all within 1 animation. When staff marks are on cooldown, swap to Scepter and use the 2 and 5 while moving freely, and use Devouring Darkness when you see a juicy clump of enemies. Make sure to stay mobile while using your skills. Getting caught out of position will often mean your death as a Scourge, and predicting where the enemy will go is often enough to survive because you can port behind them or move in another direction, and if you're alone, you may be more vulnerable, but you're also not as big of a target if you aren't standing on top of your Zerg, which is where the enemy team wants to push. So depending on whether you have a dedicated squad or not, you want to position accordingly. Because Scourge has been so over nerfed in PvP, even more so than in World vs. World, such as on the Doomfire trait and on the Eternal Life trait, it's pretty much better to play a core Necro build in PvP, and I don't really think you should ever play any version of Scourge in PvP, even if it's not this playstyle. So if you want to play the closest thing to the previous Scourge builds I've shown, first of all, you can play this in World vs. World Roaming, but this core Necro build is probably the closest thing to those other builds. So let's just go over this real quick. I have a full guide on this exact build and playstyle, which I'll link below in the description, but we'll also go over it here. So essentially, core Necromancer is going to be using the Curses trait line with the Plague Sending and Path of Corruption. So when you go in Shroud, your Dark Path is a slow-moving, unblockable projectile, which will convert 2 boons into conditions, which is very strong because it's like a 6-second cooldown. Now, a lot of people prefer Terror, but the thing is, there's a lot of stability from Core Guardians, and in the case of that, you won't even do any damage because you won't even put Fear on them. And it's very easy for enemies to just prevent your damage by just stun breaking or cleansing your Fear. So I really prefer Path of Corruption because not only will it make you do more fears because you can corrupt stability, but it will just give you more cover conditions to make your damage stick. And this is not really a burst build, it's more of a sustained damage build. So this fits the theme of the build a lot more. Then you have Weakening Shroud, which is going to make your crits do a little bit of weakness, which is pretty nice. And whenever you go in Shroud, you will leave an enfeebling blood in the area. So you want to go into Shroud near the enemy to give out a lot of weakness and extra pressure, because this gives a little bit of bleeding over time and boon corrupt. And of course, whenever you go in Shroud, you will use Plague Sending. So oftentimes this attack will trigger the Plague Sending and transfer the conditions. Then in Soul Reaping, you're going to be using Soul Marks because Staff is just really good in PvP, giving you a lot of life force and unblockable marks so that you can land your Reaper's Mark into other people's blocks and you'll actually interrupt their block. And then you have Fear of Death, which is going to give you more life force when you fear enemies and increase the duration of your fears. Now, obviously you don't have Terror, but just the fact that you have someone feared for so long allows you to free cast on them and land your Doomfires, which actually do pretty good damage in core Necromancer, because you can see here, if I crit, it does like almost 2,000 damage, and then the burn is a decent, another 1,000 damage in burning. Then replacing Scourge with Blood Magic, you have the ability to lifesteal a lot, so you're giving out an aura of lifesteal to your allies and to yourself, which makes all of your attacks just steal life, which is going to give you more damage and more sustain. And then you've got Signet of Vampirism as one of your passives. It's a 16-second internal cooldown whenever the target has 4 bleeds on them, and you also get an extra bleed from your dodge, your Mark of Evasion, which gives you regeneration. So if you get 4 bleeds on the target, you will get this vampiric mark on the target, and whenever you hit the target, it will trigger the Signet, and you'll lifesteal from them. And it actually does quite a bit of damage and healing, so it's a low cooldown that actually adds quite a bit of sustain and healing to focusing single targets. And then finally you have Unholy Martyr, which adds a lot of sustain to this build, because whenever you enter Shroud, you're transferring conditions to enemies with Plague Sending, and whenever you're leaving Shroud, you're consuming and gaining life force and removing 3 conditions. So you go into Shroud, you remove conditions, you leave Shroud, you remove conditions, you go into your Scepter, you have your Deathly Swarm to remove conditions, and then your Staff 4 removes conditions. Then you've also got Spectral Walk, which removes conditions. So you're pretty much, I mean, your heal skill as well removes conditions. So there is really no issue handling conditions on this build. It is a very hard counter to that, but you also have a lot of weakness on this build. So it's great against all types of damage, and it's a very reliable build. Now you can also replace Corrosive Poison Cloud with the Spectral Ring, which will give you a more reliable defense against assassins because it'll fear them and you can walk through it and it'll give you protection. But I like the Corrosive Poison Cloud because it gives you a little bit more down cleave, because when you place it on the target, it's not only giving poison, but it's also blocking projectiles to prevent a lot of counter pressure that happens, especially when you down an enemy that has a CC that's a projectile, like warriors or engineers. You prevent them from CCing you with the Corrosive Poison Cloud. So I really like this in like down situations, or to prevent rangers from free casting on you, or like a Deadeye. So the Corrosive Poison Cloud is what I prefer, but you can go for the Spectral Ring if you want. And then of course Lich Form, which is really nice. You generally want to use the 5 skill and the 3 skill and then just spam the 1 and 2 at the same time. If there's for some reason some projectile reflects up, then just fill in the gap with the 4 skill, which would summon a bunch of minions and they'll explode after a while, which can actually do a lot of damage. But usually the 1 skill is a little bit more immediate damage. So what you generally want to do in PvP is you want to poke with your staff marks, get a little bit of your shroud while kiting, and then when you've used all your marks, try to use your 2 and 5 and your 3 in Scepter. When they get close to you is when you want to use your shroud. Immediately use Tainted Shackles to try to torment, and then after a while it will immobilize the target. Then you want to use Dark Path and wait for them to dodge, then use your Doom, which will fear them, and from that point you can just spam your Doomfire auto attacks on them, and then you can use one more Dark Path, port to the target if you want, but I usually don't like to port to the target unless I really need to, because it increases the cooldown and that's your main corruption skill. And then you leave Shroud, and then you use your Scepter skills again, and then you swap back into your staff and use the staff skills, and then by then you can go back into Shroud. So it's sort of like use all of your weapon skills, swap to another weapon, use those weapon skills, go into Shroud, leave, and then repeat. So that's pretty much how it's played. Here's a ranked match as the core Necromancer build. I always start out using Lich before the match begins, because whenever the match begins it reduces your life force to 0 and kicks you out of Lich but recharges Lich. So essentially you get your Lich reset and then it gives you the life force after it resets. So essentially use Lich before the match starts and you get free life force. Now we're going to be heading into mid because this is a kind of slow DPS build. I'm going to put down marks to prevent the enemy herald there from aggressing on us too freely. Now I'm going to meet them in road because I have terrain here, which is to my advantage because it's harder for them to hit me while I'm able to use the terrain here. So I'm just kind of baiting them over to the terrain, going up and down it, while my Mesmer is also helping me here. So we're going to put out weakness and poison on that terrain there, so if they have to chase me, they're running through all the poison. And now we're going to go reconvene with my team and get some more kills over here. I can see that the Deadeye is really low and we just got to kill at mid anyways, so they're probably going to look for a decap. So I'm going to head to home while the rest of my team goes for the kill on the, I believe, Reaper at mid. And our Thief appears to have gotten far, so I'm just going to go into home. And a Deadeye is actually kind of dangerous for a Necromancer, but as a core Necromancer I would say it's not too bad. So I use the poison field and I blast it with staff 4 to give out weakness. You can see there's a lot of weakness out. They dodge my fear, but I land a really good dark path and use my tainted shackles to reveal them, which is a really hard counter to Deadeyes. I precast some marks if they come back, and they do get hit by some of the marks. And now I get hit by a Death's Judgment, but it doesn't crit. And I land some of my marks while trying to line of sight. And I see they're porting towards me, so I'm going to go into Shroud here so I don't get hit by anything. And I land a really good dark path into the fear. And they're porting around, but I stand on the ledge because I know that they can port back. And I keep channeling my auto attack chain there, because even if they're in stealth and I just keep pressing 1 and moving towards them, it will actually keep going through that auto attack chain and hitting them while they're in stealth. So that's one really good tip for dealing with stealth thieves, is just keep auto attacking on Scepter and you will actually keep performing that auto attack chain. So now we've got pretty much a trip cap and I've bled out the thief, so we're just gonna push in with our team into far, see if we can get any kills. I see that their Dragon Hunter is trying to disengage from mid, and I just clean up that kill very easily. I can get some life force off of their down body by using the Scepter 3, and we're in a good spot here. My Mesmer is pretty low, so we're going to try to peel for them, give out some just damage to kill the Reaper, and probably they're going to respawn and decap our home, but we've already got kills here at far and mid, so we're fine here. We can just probably go in towards home. Now I see that they're actually not going for the cap on our home node. They're trying to play like highwayman here and try to kill us in roads and get more momentum. So I am playing safe. This is 2 Revenants, but I am trying to pressure the one that used most of their cooldowns to jump on me. I do get out their heal and a decent amount of condies, but there's 3 of them here, and my Mesmer ports into them to die. So now I'm left alone. My Dragon Hunter has also died to the Deadeye. So I am essentially going to be outnumbered here. So I'm trying to kite onto the terrain here, but they chase very aggressively. I don't have enough time to even cast my worm to disengage from that. So I'm going to be killed here. And we're doing not so bad. I mean, we're 200 points ahead, but we've now wiped on the map, and their comp is very aggressive. They have 2 Revenants and a Deadeye and a Reaper. Very aggressive comp, so they can snowball very easily. So I'm going to head into home and just regroup with my team. We do have a support guardian, but they're now dead. So yeah, I see like 2 or 3 coming in towards our home. We just need to get the kill on this Reaper really quickly before the enemy team makes it in here. So we're just pressuring them very hard. I'm doing a lot of damage, but they get into their shroud and my Dragon Hunter gets instantly deleted. So I have to back up now because we didn't get the kill in time, and we are now getting chased by 2 Revenants. So I use my Shadow Return, my Spectral Walk, and I'm just kiting on terrain here to try to survive while using my Scepter 2 behind me and all those abilities that I can use while moving to get more mobility. And the worm placement here gets me in a really good spot because this little rock here prevents people from porting on top of me, so it's very safe. I'm just going to sit here and wait until I reset, because there's no point in going in there because I'll just die. So I fully reset, then I come in and try to help my team. So I put out a bunch of my staff marks, but yeah, there is like 4 of them here, and our team keeps dying around the map. So I just go for the node and try to decap because yeah, this is starting to look very bad. Now I can go into Lich and use the fear here to try to get them off the node to decap, but they don't get feared, and I have to play safely with all of those terrain and kiting spots. So the Deadeye jumps on me. I have full shroud, so I go into shroud, use my tainted shackles, and try to peel them off me. But yeah, there's a lot of people chasing me, so I'm forced to use my worm as soon as I leave shroud, and I'm just staying back. There's no point for me to go into this because we're outnumbered. If we're stalling for time, then that's doing enough. But as soon as I see that their Revenant is sort of low, then I go for the kill on them by pressuring them a little bit in shroud. They avoided my fear and dark path, but we are going to swap in here for the Scepter abilities. They're avoiding me, and the Deadeye and the other Revenant are going to jump on me because they've killed my team. So you can see here how the momentum of their team, because they kill one of my members very quickly, they can continue to kill very quickly, outnumbering my team. Now luckily someone on my team is intelligent enough to go cap nodes while they're zerging us, but if we die too quickly here, then we are going to allow them to just zerg middle afterwards and kill us there, which, as you can see, if one person doesn't survive long enough, it doesn't provide us enough presence. So we have to work on surviving really well and using terrain here, which I think we're doing a pretty good job of. So we get the fear on this rev here, and we're going to try to play very aggressively while the Guardian caps the node here. I have a pretty big advantage because there's a lot of weakness, and Revenants get pretty hard countered by conditions. So we're doing okay, but I see 3 are coming in. We do have the node, so I'm going to put down some marks here and just try to defend against the rev. But yeah, there's both of the revs are on me, and my worm actually doesn't port me through the wall there. I think that was a really bad spot to try to use it. I get my dark path on one of the revs, but the chill is not enough to really get them off me because there's also a Deadeye, and I have to line of sight 2 Revenants while getting very minimal support from my healer. And yeah, we're gonna get the down probably here on the rev. No, there's 4 here, so yeah, we're just being outnumbered constantly. So the fact that I'm able to survive that long is nice, but probably not nice enough to keep us in this match because our team is struggling to 2v1 mid, and our thief has gone to far instead of to help us at home. So we are in a bit of a bad situation here because as soon as they got the kill at mid, they just died at mid now. So we're not really making progress on the map. So what I need to do is I need to survive. I mean, I'm doing a pretty good job of surviving, but I need to stick with my team because when we're outnumbered, their team is better at outnumbering us than we are at outnumbering them. So my Guardian and I are pushing into home, but I'm not going for the node. I'm just going to put down marks, play very safely. If they port on me, they get hit by the marks. If they port on my Guardian, well, then I free cast on them. So this is a very nice positioning for me. And here you can see they jump on the Guardian, which is a support, a very tanky support, and they just get free casted on here because they jumped on the wrong target because they were pretty much given the choice between the node or for me, and they chose the node. I do get a really good Corrosive Poison Cloud on the down here, but I'm not getting a lot of support, and they get the revive. I have to go into Lich, but I get interrupted. I'm going to go in Shroud to just prevent myself from dying to like 3 assassins on me. And my Guardian, I'm not sure if they have the potential to res here, but yeah, one of our allies just keeps dying in this match. I go into Lich to try to fear them off my team, but that doesn't really do too much. I see that the Revenant here is really low, so I do some Lich autos, get them down, and I put out the Corrosive Poison Cloud, cleave them as hard as I can, go into Shroud to put even more cleave from the Enfeebling Blood, but I'm just getting CC'd by so many people while they're also rezzing, and yeah, we're just outnumbered as usual, and pretty much just constantly trying to survive being outnumbered. And as a Necromancer, that's not really the best situation for you, but I'm not going to go to far because that'll be even worse because now I'll be trying to roam around as a kind of slow build. So I just have to help my team to survive here at home. So yeah, the point lead that we had earlier on in the match is starting to dwindle, and it's getting very close. So we're going to come into mid, and we don't even own the node at home, so we're just going to try to get kills here. And I put down Corrosive Poison Cloud on the node, and I see the Deadeye here. Yeah, we're going to go for the Deadeye because they're probably playing the most greedy build here. But they jump off, and one of their Revenants actually goes down, and we get the kill. Now I see their Reaper, who is probably one of the easier targets to focus with my team because a Deadeye can just port around. So I start focusing that target. I put down my Cleave, and now we just need to focus this Herald, and probably one of my teammates will cap the node, and I'm just going to keep chasing kills here because we need to get something done eventually. So we're going to go into mid and see if I can get the decap there. My team is going for the Beast, which is maybe not the best play. I Corrosive Poison Cloud to prevent the Deadeye from using projectiles on me, but the Herald respawns on me, and I have to fear them and get out of there. Use my heal skill after I leave Shroud, and now the Rev, I can tell they're going to port on me through the wall, but I dodge and avoid most of their CCs here, and yeah, my team caps the home node, and we're going to be able to survive here. So that's pretty much it. So if you like this video, like it, subscribe for more. This is the final video in the One Build for All game mode series. So if you like this, guys, please consider supporting me on Patreon. The link to that is below, and I will see you all next time.